My name is Jimmy Grass, and I make scary stories for a living. Not the writing kind, not really creative. I work as a creepypasta reporter, which is a polite way of saying I take other people's horror stories, clean them up, and I sell them back to the internet with a straight face. On paper, I verify things, I investigate. I confirm details. That's what my editor likes to say when he's pitching it to advertisers and local papers that still pretend they care about standards. In real life, I sit in front of a screen and read lies all day. I do not believe a single story I have ever published. Not one. I've never seen a ghost. I've never heard a voice in an empty room. I've never watched a door move all by itself. I have never had a single moment in my life where I had to stop and say, that was not normal. I grew up in a normal house. I live in a normal apartment. And that's why the job worked for me. People send in true stories because they want attention or money or both. They want to feel special. They want to feel like something chose them because nothing else in their life ever does. My job is to take whatever they send and make it readable. Make it clean and sharp. Make it sound like the person telling it is stable, calm, and credible. Then I hit publish and I watch the numbers climb. If it does well, my editor messages me. Jimmy, this one's good. Jimmy, this one's a banger. Jimmy, do another one like this. My editor's name is Carl Mendez, and he talks the way you talk when you've never had to meet the people you profit from. Carl has never stood across from anyone who swears they saw something and wants to be believed. He only sees graphs. When I push back on a story, Carl always says the same thing. He says, people don't pay for the truth. They pay for a feeling. If you want to be a real journalist, go cover city council meetings. The first year I worked for Carl, I tried to do it right. I emailed people back, asked questions, I asked for exact locations. I asked for names of roads, businesses, everything. I asked for photos. Most of them stopped responding. A few got angry and told me I was ruining the magic. One guy told me he would pull his story and send it somewhere else because I was acting like the cops. And that was the moment I learned what this job really was. It wasn't reporting. It was entertainment. It was a product. And telling the truth, look, okay, it doesn't pay. And what does it hurt anyway? And that is how it starts. You change a sentence because it reads better. You tighten a paragraph because it drags. You move a scene because it hits harder at the end. You take a normal noise and call it a whisper. You take a shadow from a porch light, call it a figure. You take a bad feeling and, you turn it into a warning. You take a true story and you dress it up until it stops being true. And I got really good at it. I got good at making people sound braver than they were. Good at making their fears sound clean and organized. Good at giving them an ending that made sense, even when their own ending was just them leaving and never going back. And then I started going on location. That is the part people picture when they hear my job title. You probably did too, right? They imagine me walking around with a camera, flashlight beam cutting through fog, saying the address out loud, knocking on doors, getting chased off private property. That's not how it goes. Most locations are boring. Most haunted places are empty buildings full of beer cans and graffiti. Most cursed roads are just roads where teenagers like to park. I still go, because it sells better if I can show footage. Sells better if I can say, I was there. Sells better if I can get a shot that looks old and wrong. When I go out, I bring a camera, a tripod, microphone, and enough batteries to make it through a night. Carl would tell me to give him a scare and sell it and do what you need to do. So I did. I staged reactions. I faked sounds. I walked into rooms twice so I could get the angle again. I edited things to make it feel like something happened, because, come on, nothing ever did. And when it was done, I sent it to Carl. He'd send me a thumbs up and a fire emoji. And then the money would hit my account. That was the routine. And then last week, I got an email that looked normal until I read it twice. It came through our public submissions form. No subject line or name or story attached. Just a message and an address. The message said there was an old historical house outside town with a dollhouse inside that was alive. That was the exact word they used. Alive. I smiled when I read it, leaned back in my chair and pictured the footage already finished. Picture the headline, the comments. I clicked the address and opened the map, and it was close enough to drive. I typed a reply asking for more details, and the message bounced back. It said the account didn't exist. Under the address, there was one more line. It said the key would be waiting for me. And that was when everything changed. Well, I didn't hesitate. I copied the address into Google Maps and zoomed out until the route made sense. Ohio to West Virginia, a straight shot if you didn't mind a few hours behind the wheel. The town name was Willow's Rest. I hadn't heard of it, which was normal. Most places I worked with either didn't exist anymore or never existed in a way that really mattered. The map showed it sitting in the hills, about 30 miles south of a place called Weirton, West Virginia. Close enough to reference. Far enough to sound isolated without me having to say it out loud. I checked the route twice. Ohio Turnpike eastbound out of Toledo, I-80 for most of the state, then down to I-77 once I crossed into West Virginia. After that, it broke into smaller highways and state routes, 2-lane roads, long curves, tree cover thick enough that satellite images turned into green smears. The last stretch peeled off onto a county road with no street view available. That was fine. Lack of coverage actually helped. I forwarded the address to Carl with a short message. Got a new one. Historical house. Dollhouse story. Heading out tonight. He replied a few minutes later with a thumbs up. No questions or follow-up. Carl trusted my judgment as long as the content came back usable. I packed the car the same way I always did. Camera case in the back, tripod, batteries, all that. Lighter and pack of cigarettes in my jacket. I left in the early afternoon, so I'd have daylight for the drive and night footage for the house. That balance mattered. It always looked better if I arrived while the sun was still up and stayed after dark. It gave the impression that something changed. The Ohio Turnpike was exactly what it always was. Long stretches of nothing, broken up by rest stops and semis. I listened to a podcast about urban legends for half an hour and shut it off halfway through an ad read. I didn't need inspiration. Rain had been coming down for a while when I saw him. An older guy stood on the shoulder, a few cars ahead, half in the ditch, half on the gravel, leaning into the open hood of a dark sedan. His hazard lights blinked weakly through the rain. His jacket was soaked through, and his hands kept disappearing into the engine bay like he was trying the same thing over and over. I slowed without meaning to. He looked up as I passed, face tight, one hand raised in a small, tired wave. Just a man asking for help because he didn't have another option. I could have pulled over. I had a flashlight and tools. I had time. But I didn't. I didn't want to talk to anybody. Join the club, I said out loud. And I kept driving. I told myself I didn't want to be late. By the time I hit I-77, the sky had flattened into a low gray ceiling. Not storm clouds yet, just heavy. When I crossed into West Virginia, the terrain shifted. The road dipped and rose more sharply. Trees pressed closer to the shoulders. Towns appeared and vanished in minutes. Exit signs listed places I recognized only because I'd written about them once or twice. I stopped for gas near Parkersburg, grabbed a coffee, and checked the address again. Still there, no additional messages or updates or follow-up story. And that wasn't unusual. Most people who submitted tips never wanted to talk. They just wanted the thing to exist somewhere else once it left their hands. I stayed on I-77 longer than the map suggested, then took an exit marked by a green sign with peeling paint. From there, it was state routes, numbers instead of names. The road narrowed, cell service dropped from full bars to 1, then nothing. The rain started about 10 minutes from Willow's rest. First it was light, just enough to tap against the windshield, then heavier. Real rain. The kind that fills the ditches and makes the road shine black under the headlights. Willow's rest didn't announce itself. There was no welcome sign or Main Street marker. Just a small cluster of buildings pulled close to the road. A post office, a closed convenience store, a gas station with one pump and no lights on. I passed through it without slowing down and checked the map again. The house was another mile past town. The road turned to gravel. My tires kicked up wet stones as I followed it downhill, then back up. The trees opened briefly, and I saw the house before the map told me I'd arrived. It sat alone, set back from the road behind a low iron fence. 2 stories, wide front porch, dark windows. The kind of place people described as beautiful when they were trying not to say unsettling. I pulled over and shut off the engine. The rain drummed against the roof. I checked the message one more time. The key would be waiting for me. I got out of the car and walked toward the fence, already thinking about where I'd set the tripod. And at that point, it was still just another story. The gate wasn't locked. It gave a low groan when I pushed it open, the sound stretched thin by the rain. Water ran down the iron bars in narrow streams, dripping onto the stone path beneath my boots. The storm had settled into a steady rhythm, rain falling hard enough to soak through fabric, and thunder rolled somewhere over the hills, constant and low. I stepped through and pulled the gate shut behind me. It clicked softly. The path to the house curved uphill. Wet leaves clung to the stones and made them slick. Wind moved through the trees on both sides, branches rubbing together in long, uneven scrapes. The porch light was on, warm and steady, which didn't match the inactive listing I'd seen online. Power meant someone was paying for it, or had paid recently enough that it hadn't been shut off yet. I kept walking. Up close, the house didn't look abandoned. The paint was old, but not peeling. The porch boards were solid. The front door was dark wood with a brass handle. The key was exactly where the message said it would be, sitting on the porch railing like someone had just set it down and stepped away. No envelope or note, just the key on a plain metal ring, already wet. I picked it up, wiped it against my jacket, and slid it into the lock. It turned easily. The door opened inward with a soft sound, like the hinges had been oiled recently. I stepped inside. Thunder still rolled overhead, and each time it did, the sound traveled through the beams and floorboards instead of echoing out into open air. The air inside smelled old, but clean. Dry wood. Dust that had settled and stayed where it fell. No mildew or rot. It smelled like a house that had been closed, but not forgotten. I shut the door behind me. The latch slid home with a quiet click. The entryway was narrow, with a long hallway running straight through the center of the house. The floorboards creaked under my weight, sharp and distinct in the quiet between thunderclaps. A staircase climbed along the right wall, banister worn smooth from years of hands. I set my bag down, pulled my camera out, and turned it on. I checked my phone out of habit. No service. The time was still early enough that I could have turned around and been back on the interstate before dark, but I did not even consider it. This was work, and the storm, that made it even better. Rain on windows, thunder in the background. The kind of sound you couldn't fake cleanly in editing. This was perfect. Before going upstairs, I walked the hallway again and listened between thunder, making sure the camera caught the normal house noises, The boards settling, the distant patter on the roof, the occasional tap of a branch against a window. Nothing jumped out, and that was fine. Nothing ever did. I filmed the hallway first, then the staircase, the closed doors, the dim light coming through the front windows, and then I moved into the sitting room on the left. Heavy furniture filled the space, arranged neatly, as if someone had staged it for a tour. A dark couch sat against the far wall. A low table with carved legs stood in front of it. Lightning flashed through the window and turned everything bright for a split second. Thunder followed close behind, loud and enough to rattle the glass. Framed photographs covered the walls. I walked along them slowly, camera steady. Families, couples, children posed stiffly beside adults. The further along the wall I went, the more the images faded, until the frames held pale, yellowed rectangles where pictures had once been. Across the hall was the dining room. A long table stretched down the center, chairs pushed in evenly. Place settings sat exactly where they should be, plates centered, utensils aligned perfectly. A china cabinet stood against the far wall, glass doors clouded with age, but intact. I moved past it into the kitchen at the back of the house. It was pretty small. Old appliances, original to the house. Their enamel worn but unchipped. Cabinets lined the walls, doors hanging slightly uneven on their hinges. The sink was dry. The counters were clean, not scrubbed, just untouched. Thunder cracked directly overhead, loud enough that I paused with my hand on the counter. The sound rolled through the house and settled into the walls. I checked under the sink out of habit. Empty. From the kitchen window, I could see the storm pressing against the glass. Rain ran in thick lines down the pane. The trees beyond moved in uneven waves. I went back into the hallway and looked at the staircase again. Upstairs footage was always worth it. Older houses always sounded worse on the second floor. More creaks. And I climbed. Each step creaked under my boots. The sound of rain on the roof grew louder as I went. Lightning flashed through the stairwell window and made the banister shine for an instant. The second floor landing was narrow, with doors branching off on both sides. A bathroom at the end of the hall stood open, clawfoot tub visible inside. Rain streaked down the small window above it. I filmed the view outside for a few seconds and moved on. The first bedroom door I tried was unlocked. Inside, the room was bare except for an old dresser and a bed frame without a mattress. Dust lay in soft layers across the floor. The wallpaper had faded in vertical bands, lighter where pictures or furniture must have been. The next door was locked. I tested the handle once, felt the resistance, and let it go. At the end of the hall was another door. It was open. The rain sounded heavier here, as if the roof above that room took the brunt of the storm. The wind hit the side of the house and made the window frames give a faint rattle. I stepped closer, camera up, and I angled the lens through the doorway. I stepped inside slowly, keeping the camera up and steady, letting the lens adjust while the storm hammered the roof overhead. Rain struck the shingles in a constant, heavy pattern, and thunder rolled through the house like it was being dragged from one end to the other. There was a heavy boom of thunder, and then I saw it. The dollhouse. It wasn't a cabinet or shelves or a model you leaned over. The entire room had been converted into a town. The original floorboards were gone, replaced by a raised platform that sat flush against all four walls. Streets ran through it in clean, deliberate lines, intersecting at right angles. Sidewalks bordered them, complete with tiny curbs and crosswalks painted and faded white. I walked to the edge and stopped. The scale hit me immediately. This wasn't something you crouched to look at. Parts of it came up to my knees. Higher in places where buildings rose above the streets. I could have stepped into it if I wanted to. Every single building had a sign. Every sign had a name. I knelt and brought the camera lower. Closest to the doorway was Willow's Rest Post Office. The name painted above a brick facade. Tiny metal mail slots were set into the wall. A cork bulletin board hung beside the door, layered with miniature notices and flyers. I couldn't read the text without zooming in, but the paper was real. Across the street sat Miller & Sons Fuel, a gas station with rounded pumps and faded red logos. The numbers on the meters were frozen mid-count. Rubber hoses looped down and rested against the pumps like someone had just finished filling a car and walked away. A hand-lettered sign in the window read, "Open 7 days." Cars lined the streets. Models from the 1950s, it looked like, parked neatly along the curbs or stopped at intersections. I recognized makes and body styles without knowing why. And their paint jobs were immaculate. Streetlights stood at regular intervals, each one slightly different, as if they'd been installed over time instead of all at once. Their bulbs were dark but intact. Some leaned just a little, like they'd been nudged and never straightened. Further in was Beetle's Barber Shop. The striped pole outside was painted red, white, and blue, the colors clean and bright. Inside, 3 chairs sat in front of mirrors mounted along the wall. One chair was turned slightly away from the others, angled toward the door, as if someone had stood up in a hurry. Scissors lay on the counter, these little tiny scissors, beside a comb. And a tiny little calendar hung crookedly on the wall. Across from the barber shop sat Ridgeway Theater. The marquee advertised a single title, Sunset Drive. I didn't recognize the name, but it looked right. The glass doors were clear enough that I could see rows of little seats inside, all facing forward. The screen was blank. Popcorn tubs were stacked neatly beside the concession stand. The rain outside intensified, hammering the roof harder. I moved farther along the perimeter, narrating quietly for the camera, already thinking about pacing. Slow pans, lingering shots. Let the viewer explore it the way I was. Near the center of the room sat Maple Pond. Real water filled it. The surface was dark and reflective, catching the glow from the overhead light. Tiny ripples sat frozen mid-motion, like the water had been disturbed and then stopped all at once. A small wooden dock extended out over it, planks slightly warped, tiny little nails visible. A hand-painted sign at the shore read, "No swimming." Birds hung above the pond on thin strings. At least I assumed they were strings. They were nearly invisible unless I tilted my head and caught the light just right. The birds' wings were spread wide, bodies angled, as if they'd been caught mid-flight. Their eyes were glassy and dark. I held the camera steady and zoomed in. The attention to detail in this little dollhouse town was unbelievable. I found a narrow opening between buildings, and I stepped into the town itself. The platform felt solid under my boots. I followed one of the main streets inward, careful not to brush against anything. Shops lined the street. Henderson's Hardware had a display of tiny tools in the window. Larkspur Pharmacy sat beside it, Shelves visible through the glass, rows of bottles aligned perfectly. Willow's Rest Savings Bank stood on the corner, columns flanking the entrance. A clock mounted above the door, frozen at the same time. Then I saw the restaurant. The sign above the door read Happy's. Red letters, clean paint. A smiling face worked into the logo, simple and cheerful. The building was low and wide, with these big front windows and a neon outline that wasn't lit. Inside, the tables were full. Dolls sat in every chair. They weren't lined up or posed stiffly. They were frozen mid-action, caught in the middle of ordinary moments. Plates sat on the tables, food arranged neatly. Forks were raised, spoons hovered inches above bowls. Cups were tilted slightly, like someone had just taken a sip. Their heads were turned, not sharply or dramatically, but every face was angled toward the doorway where I'd come in. I stopped walking. Wow, this was good work. I filmed the restaurant slowly, panning from table to table. The dolls' expressions were simple. Smiles, neutral looks. Their clothes matched the era of the town. Dresses with buttons. Suits with ties knotted carefully. The doll at the front table wore more than the others. He had on a full black suit, pressed clean, the fabric smooth and unwrinkled. A white shirt showed at the collar, and pinned just below it was a small circular button. White background, black lettering. Mayor Smiley. I held the shot for a long time, longer than the rest, letting the camera settle. The little guy's top hat sat squarely on his head, brim straight. His hands were placed flat on the table, palms down, like he'd been waiting for someone to arrive. On the table in front of him was a folded sheet of paper, and I stepped closer. The paper was real. It wasn't painted, not printed as part of the display. It lay between the plate and the fork, positioned neatly, corners aligned with the edge of the table. I leaned in and zoomed. The heading at the top read, Town Rules. Below it were 3 lines, written in clean, careful handwriting. Number 1, always be nice. Number 2, help your neighbor. And 3 read, and most importantly, never lie. I read it twice, once silently and once out loud for the camera. What a weird little place. I straightened up and scanned the rest of the room. Other tables had food, plates of tiny burgers, fries stacked neatly, bowls of soup filled to the same level, condiments lined up along counters, labels facing outward. Napkin dispensers sat square in the middle of tables, chrome sides polished. But only Mayor Smiley's table had paper on it. I shifted position and filmed him from another angle. The button caught the light briefly, letters flashing white before settling back into shadow. His smile was fixed in place. I glanced around the room again, making sure I hadn't missed anything obvious. No other signs or notes, just the dolls frozen mid-meal and the sound of the storm pressing down on the house around me. I narrated quietly as I moved, describing what I saw, choosing words I knew I'd keep later. Carefully arranged, deliberate, disturbing in its restraint. This was the kind of detail that made people lean closer to their screens. I lowered the camera and took a step back, giving myself a wider view of the restaurant. From this angle, the dolls' heads looked even more uniform, all turned just enough towards the doorway, like they were watching. Clever staging. Someone wanted the first person who entered the room to feel noticed. That was all. Museums did the same thing, so did escape rooms. So did every haunted attraction that charged by the ticket. I raised the camera again and filmed a slow pullback shot, ending on the happy sign above the door. The rain outside beat steadily. Thunder rolled again, deeper this time. I stopped recording and checked the footage. This was incredible. I smiled to myself. This was going to be easy. I didn't start right away. I stood there for a moment and let the storm do its thing. Rain hammered from the roof. Thunder rolled low and wide. I waited for a long one, counted it out in my head, then stepped back into frame. That timing mattered. I set the tripod a little closer this time, angled low so the restaurant filled most of the shot and the rest of the town fell away behind it. Depth sold scale. Scale sold fear. I checked the framing, adjusted it just a hair to the left, and hit record. I stepped into view and let my shoulders tighten. I changed my voice first, just a little. Not shaky, just breathier, like I was trying not to panic. I don't know how to explain this, I said, looking past the camera instead of into it. I thought this was just a setup, a display, but the more time I spend in here, the more wrong it feels. Thunder hit right on cue, enough that the sound rolled through my chest. I paused and looked up, letting the silence stretch. These aren't props. They're real. I mean, look at this. I crouched and zoomed the camera in on the restaurant tables. The little dolls with their forks raised, knives angled, spoons hovering inches from bowls. I let the lens linger on the silverware. I slowly panned across the table settings, breathing a little heavier now, like I was working myself up. They're eating, I said. They're all eating. I straightened abruptly and took a step back, bumping into a chair on purpose. Oh my God. I swung the camera towards the dolls' faces. They're real. They're all real. I think they want to eat me. I let that line sit there. It was stupid and perfect. I zoomed back in on the forks and knives, tighter this time, so close I could see the edges, the tiny grooves in the handles. I angled the shot so the doll's hands filled the frame. Oh my God, do you see that? I snapped the camera toward the back of the room, then back to the tables. It moved. Nothing had moved. I knew exactly how to fake it later. A single frame jump. A sound layered under the thunder. Enough to make people argue about it online for days, believe me. The storm helped again. Rain intensified. Thunder rolled long. I tilted my head slightly like I was listening. They're laughing. I moved closer to the dolls now, circling the tables. I dragged my hand lightly along the edge of one chair, letting my fingers tremble just enough for the camera to catch it. They're dolls from hell, I said. I reached out and picked up one of the dolls from a nearby table. I didn't hesitate this time. I lifted it high, turned it toward the camera, then tilted it side to side. It's warm. It wasn't. I knew that. But people believed what you told them to believe. I moved the doll's arms slightly, bending them at the joint so the fork angled closer to its mouth. I turned its head a few degrees, just enough that it looked like it was watching me instead of the doorway. No, stop. Stop that. I set the doll down in a different chair, not where it had been before. I did the same with another one, then another, rearranging them just enough to make the scene feel unsettled. A chair pulled out, a plate shifted, a fork turned the wrong way. I knocked one of them over accidentally, on purpose, and let it hit the platform with a dull thud. I straightened up and looked around the restaurant again, breathing hard, eyes wide. I'm not supposed to be here. Thunder cracked overhead. It was perfect. I stopped recording. The red light on the camera went dark. The room went back to being just a strange room. I stood there for a second, then laughed again. That is gonna kill. I didn't put the dolls back how I'd found them. I stepped over the one I'd knocked down, didn't bother fixing the chairs I'd moved. I didn't straighten the silverware. I grabbed the camera and the tripod, shut off the overhead light, and pulled the door closed behind me, leaving the little weird town half disturbed in the dark. The storm followed me into the hallway. I walked past the other rooms and went into one of the bedrooms I'd checked earlier. A real bedroom. A bed frame against the wall, and a dresser, and no dolls. I dropped my bag near the foot of the bed and sat down for a moment, listening to the rain in the window. I wasn't done yet. I planned to stay until morning, get some daylight shots of the exterior, maybe grab a few calmer angles inside once the storm passed. That always helped balance the edit. I lay back and stared up at the ceiling, already thinking about what I might need to reshoot. I was still smiling when I closed my eyes, and somewhere between one thunderclap and the next, I fell asleep. I woke up thirsty. Not suddenly or with panic. For a second I thought I heard whispering. Lasted maybe a second. Then I sat up. It stopped. I stayed still, listening. Rain hit the roof in a steady, heavy rhythm. Thunder still rolled close. I couldn't hear anything but the storm. And I told myself I'd imagined it. That happens sometimes, when you wake up in unfamiliar places. Your brain fills in sounds before you're fully awake. I rubbed my face and looked around the room. I was in the bedroom I'd picked earlier, the real one. I reached down and picked up my phone from the floor. The screen lit the room faintly. Still no service. The time showed I'd slept longer than I meant to, but not too long. Morning was still a while off. My throat felt dry, and I remembered the water was in the car. I remembered leaving it there, clearly, unopened, sitting in the cup holder. I debated ignoring it and lying back down, but I was thirsty. I told myself I'd just go out there, grab it, and come right back. As I swung my legs off the bed and stood up, another thought occurred to me. Maybe somebody came home. The house had power. The porch light had been on when I arrived. Wasn't impossible that someone else used the place, or checked on it from time to time. The whispering I thought I'd heard could have been somebody downstairs. The explanation sat easily enough. I stepped into the hallway. I moved slowly, listening for voices downstairs as I went. And halfway down the hall I paused. Nothing. I shook my head once and kept walking. The stairs creaked under my weight, sounding sharper than earlier. I kept one hand on the banister, more out of habit than caution. The storm hit harder as I descended, thunder rolling long and low. At the bottom of the stairs, the hallway stretched toward the front door. The porch light outside cast a faint glow through the glass panels, breaking the darkness into soft shapes. I took a few steps forward, and my foot slid. I didn't see what I stepped on. I just felt the sudden loss of traction, the way my weight shifted before my balance could catch up. My other foot came down too late. My shoulder hit first, then my head. The sound of the storm stretched and warped as the floor rushed up to meet me. I remember thinking I should have turned the lights on, and then everything went dark. I came back to myself slowly, not waking up as much as surfacing. The storm was still there, rain hammering the house, thunder. but it sounded more distant now, like it was happening somewhere else. My head was throbbing, and when I opened my eyes, I was on the floor. The hallway ceiling swam slightly above me. The porch light still glowed through the glass panels at the far end. I lay there and took stock. Alright, headache, sore shoulder, no blood that I could feel. I pushed myself up onto my elbow and winced. Great. I sat there for a moment longer, letting the dizziness settle. I got to my feet slowly, testing my balance, then leaned against the wall until the pulsing in my head got a little bit better. My camera was still slung over my shoulder. I checked it without thinking, and it was okay. The red light was off. I hadn't been recording. I told myself maybe I'd slipped on dust or something I tracked in. Old houses were full of ways to hurt yourself if you weren't paying attention. And that explanation worked well enough. I turned toward the stairs, and at the top, the hallway above looked the same as before. Doors closed, one open, dim light bleeding out from the far end. Wait. The dollhouse room. The light was on. I was sure I'd turned it off. I stood there for a second listening again. Rain, thunder. No talking or whispering. I walked slowly down the hall and stopped in the doorway. As I looked inside, I noticed the dollhouse town was different. The platform was still there, streets and sidewalks and buildings. But the town wasn't populated anymore. The streets were bare, cars gone, the gas station empty, the barber chairs vacant, the movie theater seats unoccupied. Maple Pond was still filled with water, but the birds that had hung above it were gone, strings dangling loose like they'd been cut or removed. Happy stood silent. The restaurant tables were still set, plates and silverware in place, but every chair was empty. Every chair except one. Mayor Smiley sat at the front table. He hadn't moved from his seat, but something about him seemed different. He leaned forward slightly now, one arm extended, his finger pointed down at the table in front of him, at the paper. I stepped into the room without realizing I'd moved. The paper was still there, but it wasn't the same. The heading, Town Rules, was smeared. The ink darker, like someone had pressed down hard with a marker. All 3 rules were underlined now. Not neatly. Angrily. Red marker had been dragged back and forth beneath each line. Always be nice. Help your neighbor. And most importantly, never lie. Red lines cut through the page, underlining each rule multiple times. There were additional marks too. Jagged lines, circles, heavy slashes. I stared at it and then looked up. Mayor Smiley's face was the same shape as before, but his eyebrows had been angled downward slightly, enough to change the expression completely. The button on his suit still read Mayor Smiley, but it was crooked now, pinned on at an angle. He looked angry, focused. I felt a tightness in my chest. "All right, who's here?" I said, looking around the room. "This is a joke. Come on, who's messing with me? Carl, is that you?" I looked around, scanning the edges of the room, the doorway, the corners. Nothing moved. Nobody answered. The storm outside surged again, thunder rolling close. I stepped closer to the table. The paper crinkled slightly as the air shifted. I backed away. I told myself there had to be somebody else here, a caretaker, an owner, Someone who didn't appreciate being turned into content. Maybe somebody that decided to make a point. I took another step back and nearly bumped into one of the miniature buildings behind me. And that was when I realized my hands were shaking. I raised the camera without thinking and aimed it at the table. If this was a prank, I might as well use it. I looked through the camera and aimed it at Mayor Smiley, who still looked very angry and was pointing down at the rules. I told myself again it was a prank. Somebody had come home, found the setup, maybe decided to make a point. Yeah, that was easy to explain. What wasn't easy to explain was why I'd thought it was a good idea to sleep here. I stood in the doorway of the dollhouse room for another second. What the hell was I thinking sleeping here? I backed out of the room without turning my back, and then I closed the door. I didn't care about the footage anymore. Somebody was in this house, playing some kind of prank on me that really was not funny. Maybe they'd even tripped me. I wanted out of here. I went straight to the bedroom, grabbed my bag, slung it over my shoulder, and wrapped my fingers around the camera. I didn't check the footage. I didn't pack up neatly, I just got my things. I headed for the stairs and took them two at a time and hit the bottom hard, boots sliding slightly on the floor and almost falling again. And the front door was right there. I crossed the hallway, reached out and grabbed the handle. And it didn't turn. I tried again, harder. Nothing. I leaned into it and twisted with both hands, and the handle stayed where it was. Okay. I checked the windows next, and they were locked. Every one of them. Thick bars ran across the inside of the frames, painted the same color as the walls. I hadn't noticed them before. I didn't know how I could have missed that, but they were there, bolted in place. My pulse picked up. I hadn't seen a back or side door to the house, only I remembered the basement. I hadn't gone down there yet. I remembered noticing the door near the kitchen. It was set into the wall at an angle. I thought it might be a cellar entrance, the kind older houses have. A storm cellar. A way out that didn't involve the front door, maybe. I moved fast toward the back of the house. And the basement door was where I remembered it. Wooden and solid. A single bulb above it flickered as thunder rolled overhead. I grabbed the handle and pulled. It creaked open. Cold air spilled out immediately, carrying the smell of damp earth and old concrete. The stairs descended steeply, narrow and uneven. The light switch at the top worked, but barely. The bulb at the bottom flickered and steadied. The basement was larger than I expected. Stone walls and a dirt floor. A few old shelves along one side, empty except for dust and cobwebs. No windows or obvious exits. There was another door at the far end. That had to be it. I crossed the room and grabbed the handle. It didn't open, and I pulled harder. Nothing. I swore under my breath and turned away, already thinking about my next move. And that was when something bit my leg. Sharp pain flared just above my ankle, sudden and bright enough that I yelped and stumbled backward. I looked down without thinking, and I saw a doll clamped onto my leg. A woman. She wore a dress, faded blue, the fabric torn in places. Her hair was red, stiff and wiry, hanging down in tangled strands. Her mouth was open very wide, and she had very sharp teeth that were sunk into my leg. For a second, I just stood there and stared. I couldn't believe what I was seeing. And then the pain flared back up, and I kicked instinctively, trying to shake her off. But she held on, jaw locked, teeth grinding. The pain was bad. I screamed and kicked again. Finally, the little redhead thing came loose and hit the floor, skidding across the dirt. I staggered back, heart pounding, staring at the blood soaking through my sock. It looked like an animal bite. When I was a kid, a raccoon had gotten into our garage. I tried to scare it out, and it had gone for my leg instead. I snapped back to the present. What the hell? The doll twitched on the floor, and I didn't wait to see what she did next. I just ran. I took the stairs up 3 at a time, slipped on the last step, caught myself on the wall, and burst into the damn hallway. Pain throbbed through my leg with every step, but adrenaline kept me moving. I didn't look back. I hit the front door hard, slammed my shoulder into it, and grabbed the handle again. And it still wouldn't move. Open, I said. The storm outside surged, thunder cracking so close it made my ears ring. Something moved behind me, and I turned. They were coming from every direction. Dolls. Dozens of them, spilling out of rooms, down the stairs, from corners I hadn't seen before. Small bodies, little painted smiles, eyes all fixed on me. Little forks and knives clutched in tiny hands, spoons held up like weapons. They moved together, slowly circling me and closing in. I backed against the door. The front handle didn't budge. The dolls kept moving closer. This was real. There was nowhere left for me to go. Forks and knives caught the porch light and flashed white as thunder rolled overhead. Spoons bobbed in small, eager arcs. Painted smiles stayed fixed in place. The hallway felt smaller with every step they took. And then the movement shifted. The dolls didn't stop. They parted. A narrow path opened down the center of the hall, straight from the base of the stairs to where I stood, with my back pressed to the front door. The ones along the edges turned their heads slightly, not toward me anymore, but toward the space they were clearing. Heavy footsteps came from the stairs, and Mayor Smiley stepped into view. He seemed bigger than before. The black suit still fit him cleanly, pressed and smooth, the fabric stretching over wide shoulders. The top hat stayed perfectly centered as he walked slowly towards me. In his hand was a very sharp knife. The button on his chest glimmered, still pinned neatly to his shirt. Mayor Smiley. He stopped a few feet away from me, and the dolls leaned in, waiting. Mayor Smiley reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a folded sheet of paper, the same one from the restaurant. He unfolded it slowly and held it up between us. Red marker still covered it, angry, underlining each rule again and again. He raised the knife and tapped the page, and I felt my breath stop. I reached into my jacket and pulled out the lighter. I didn't light it. I just held it up and angled it toward the drapes beside the door. It was old fabric, dry. One spark would do it. I'll burn this place down. The dolls reacted instantly. Their smiles tightened. Their movements sharpened. The circle closed faster now, utensils lifting higher. The sound of tiny feet scraping wood filled the hallway. Mayor Smiley's expression changed. His face hardened, and his grip tightened. He stepped closer and raised the knife above his shoulder. I realized something then. Fire wasn't leverage. Bringing my lighter out, threatening them, it was an insult. The rules on the paper ran through my mind, and something clicked. I let the lighter drop on purpose. It clattered across the floor, and I sank down with it, knees hitting the wood. I got down to their eye level. "I'm sorry," I said. I bowed my head without thinking about it. "I'm sorry I came here. I'm sorry I knocked some of you over. I'm sorry I used you for my job." The dolls paused. Mayor Smiley didn't move. "I'm sorry," I said. I didn't care. I just wanted a story." Mayor Smiley lifted the paper again. He tapped the rules with a knife. My throat tightened. "I'm sorry I lied." The hallway stayed silent, except for the storm. And then Mayor Smiley tilted his head slightly, like he was considering something. And then he turned his head slowly and looked toward the front door. I heard a soft click, the lock sliding open. And I didn't hesitate. I scrambled to my feet, slipped once, caught myself, and threw myself at the door. The handle turned easily this time, and I yanked it open and stumbled out into the storm. I ran through the rain, and I didn't look back until I reached the car. The dolls stood in the doorway and at the windows, lined up neatly now, faces pressed close to the glass, watching me. Mayor Smiley stood at the very center of them, knife still in his hand, head tilted just slightly. I got into the car, slammed the door, and started the engine. As I pulled away, tires spinning on wet gravel, I glanced back one last time. The front door was closed now, and the dolls that had been at the windows were gone. And then the house disappeared behind the trees, and I kept going. When I got home, I didn't talk to anyone for days. I didn't answer calls or return messages. Didn't even turn on the TV. I just sat in my apartment with the lights off, in the quiet, replaying everything in my mind. I kept seeing the dolls and the knife and the paper. I kept seeing the way Mayor Smiley had pointed at the rules. I slept badly. When I did sleep, I dreamt about being watched and their town's rules. I thought about my job, how long I'd been doing it, about how easy it'd been to justify what I was doing because it paid well and I said nobody ever got hurt, about how I'd laughed in that room, knocked some of them over, lied and used them as props. And I knew what to do then. I sat down at my desk, looked out the window, and I wrote the last story I ever would. I wrote about the house. I wrote about Willow's rest. I wrote about the dollhouse and the town inside it. I wrote about Happy's and the mayor and the rules written on that piece of paper. And for the first time in my entire career, I didn't add anything. I wrote exactly what happened. I said I went there expecting it to be fake. I said I disrespected them. I said I tried to turn it into content. I said the dolls and the town were real, whatever they were. I wrote about the rules, about being nice and helping people, about never lying. I told the truth. And when I published it, I didn't expect much. I figured people would call it a stunt or just another lie dressed up as honesty. But it did better than anything I'd ever written. My boss, Carl, called me the next day. He was excited. Told me it was the best performing piece we'd ever run. Told me advertisers were asking questions. Told me I might get a raise. And then he started telling me another tip. A town in Ohio, Daggerland, something about a monster, an old mechanic, a sheriff, and a dog. And I did not let him finish. I told him I was done. I was quitting, and I hung up before he could argue. I don't do that kind of work anymore. I got a job at an old bookstore, actually. Yeah, they still exist. I help people find books. I reprice things. I add stickers and carry boxes. Doesn't pay much, but it's honest. Yeah, I know. I could quit the bookstore and go back to my old job. I could take another tip, shoot another scary story, tell another story that is completely made up. I could make a lot more money that way. But I'm not going back. I try to be nicer to people now. If I see somebody on the side of the road, I stop. If I see a neighbor in my apartment struggling to carry something, I help. And even when it would make me more money, even when it would make things a lot easier, I don't lie. I know what would happen if I did.